هنبتدي دلوقتي في الجلسة الثانية النهاردة معانا. الجلسة هتكون عن موضوع يعني بالنسبة لي أنا ممتع جدا جدا، من أهم المواضيع اللي ممكن نتكلم فيها، وهو الإسكان والأراضي وحقوق الملكية. هيكون بيدير الجلسة معانا جيمس شاو. جيمس هو المدير الأول لبرنامج الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا في هابيتات فور هيومانيتي انترناشونال. جيمس بقاله 9 سنين موجود في هابيتات فور هيومانيتي. كان في البداية بيدير آسيا والمحيط الهادي، ودلوقتي التركيز بتاعه على منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا. جيمس كمان معاه أكتر من 15 سنة من الخبرة في مجالات التنمية، واشترك مع الصليب الأحمر، واشترك مع عدة منظمات و بنرحب بجيمس. شكرا.
Thank you, Marwa. Joseph Ombretta, please, Sarah, come up. And we have Samar online. Yeah, fantastic. Have a seat. Three mics, yeah. Okay, good morning, everyone. I believe this is the final in-person discussion before we start to wrap up the forum. So just first, thanks for joining with us for now 3 days. What we have for this session, so ladies and gentlemen, let me say first, welcome, thank you. What we're looking forward to unpacking over this 60 minutes or 55 minutes now is a discussion really focused on quite a sensitive and a nuanced topic: housing, land and property rights here across the MENA region. And allow me to provide a bit of a backdrop just before I introduce our speakers. So we look at across the region here, we have, in no particular order, a rapidly growing population, a rapid, often unplanned urbanizing region, cities, nations. So there's high levels of rapid urbanization. As we know, there's significant displacement. Whatever the causes, the result is displacement. And looking ahead, which we'll touch on in this session soon, more incidents of climate-induced displacement. And then we've got rising levels of absolute poverty in pockets of the region. Each one of these factors highlights or exasperates vulnerability with regards to tenure security, each one of them. And you put them together, 2, 3 or 4, and this vulnerability compounds. So this is, and what we'd like to do is start to unpack some of the impacts of this vulnerability. But first, let me introduce my colleagues to my left. So first, Sarah Ghanem. Sarah is the Information, Counselling and Legal Assistance, ICLA. You will hear the acronym ICLA a lot in this session. So ICLA refers to Information, Counselling and Legal Assistance. So Sarah is the ICLA specialist for the Norwegian Refugee Council based in Lebanon. Next to Sarah is Ombretta Tempera. Ombretta is a land specialist at UN Habitat and the Global Land Tool Network, GLTN, based in the UN Habitat Regional Office for the Arab States here in Egypt. We have Joseph Sheckler. Joseph is the coordinator of the Housing and Land Rights Network with the Habitat International Coalition, also based here in Egypt. And joining us online is Samar Farhat. Samar is with Habitat for Humanity International as the Housing, Land and Property, or HLP, and Urban Recovery Advisor with Habitat for Humanity in Lebanon. So Samar, I hope you're with us, and yeah, looking forward to a conversation, and sorry you couldn't be here next to us. So before I hand to our speakers, a few things. We don't have presentations in this next 52 minutes. We're going to have a discussion. We've got some questions to pose amongst us, and a few opportunities just to turn to you all for your own questions, your comments, your inputs, your insights. So my hope for this session is a conversation. But let me just call out, please, a few numbers before we start our conversation. Let's look at Lebanon. 25% of Syrian families surveyed as part of the recent Lebanon Crisis Response Plan, 25% of those families had been evicted since October 2019. In pockets of Iraq, in the last year, there has been a 100% to a 150% increase in rental costs. In Jordan, where we have the overwhelming majority of Syrian refugees dispersed in urban areas are renting, 7% of those, so nearly 1 in 10, reported being evicted at least once in the last year. And these numbers just speak to a very, very small component of a broader issue of housing, land and property, but it also speaks to how acute the issue is. So I just wanted to highlight, to start with that framing. So what we hope to do in this session really is just to shine a light on these issues. So complex, so nuanced, based on what the drivers are at a country level and impacting vulnerable families and communities. So we're going to start a conversation. And first, perhaps with Umbretta and Joseph, I'd like to ask a couple of questions of both of you. And Umbretta, to start with you. So this is a broad question, so I encourage you to answer as you wish. But in a few sentences, tell me how you tell us how you describe the state of play of housing, land and property rights across the MENA region. When you hear that, when you approach this issue, what comes to mind?
Thank you so much for the question, and good morning, everyone. It's nice to have the opportunity to speak to this audience. So housing, land and property rights, is the formulation we use basically for land tenure security in context of humanitarian assistance. And, security of tenure is one of the 7 components of adequate housing. So therefore, it's really, I would just say it's obvious, but it's very key, is very key to provision of adequate housing. And, we are happy to have this session on HLP, in this forum. The situation in the region is quite diverse. We are looking at 22 countries. Some are really high income. There are obviously a lot of discrepancies on this topic. If we look at some of the countries in the Gulf, for example, or those at conflict. But, in a nutshell, definitely we see a region where informality is high, let's say 30 to 40%, which, it's defined differently in different countries, but it denotes sometimes of irregularities in the built environment, either compliance to planning, building codes of standards, or registration, type of registration. So I think it's quite clear. In some countries, really goes more than 90%. And some countries, particularly in the Gulf, claim to be, you know, almost 0 or less than 5%. But still, you know, overall in the region is high. And also this is an urban phenomenon, but very much also a rural phenomena. We see that, you know, land rights of rural community of pastoralists are not recognized. And also there are still in the region large parts of land that are really customarily and traditionally administered, where, you know, the land is allocated, you know, by the chiefs for using for housing or agriculture and other uses. And this is, you know, is not consistently recognized in the legislation and really creates a problem and also contributes to, you know, the urban to rural to urban migration. So overall, a kind of a, you know, undermining of the communal arrangements that are in terms of land access. The second point you very briefly mentioned to it as well is related to the displaced and the migrants. We have conservative figures of over 60 million, you know, people who move, you know, in search of better employment, but also people displaced by war. And here the case law really looks at, you know, multiple waves of displacement, destruction of housing, large-scale destruction of housing, illegal occupation, and illegal sale, illegal confiscations, where we would normally call it basically housing, land, and property rights violation being used as a weapon of war by the parties in conflict to generate income that is then used to finance the warfare, but also, you know, housing and land that are confiscated from the rightful owners to give back as an incentive to the combatant for their services when, you know, different groups do not maybe the capacity to pay in cash for this service. Climate, definitely a big factor. You know, we see that, for example, there's a recent report from IOM where only in Iraq, there is about 60,000 people displaced by climate-related effects. The third point out of 4, just to be clear, is the fact that really we see the region, a region very much affected by increasing inequality in terms of income and power. And this somehow twists the policies to, in a different perspective, basically where the land and housing is used is mostly serving the, you know, the elites or the national elites, or also the international capital to actually generate more wealth rather than, you know, to serve its social purpose. So commodification of land, that is also creative distortion, and basically moving land and housing, moving away from their social function, but also from its productive uses and to sustain livelihoods. Towards something that is used to store wealth, basically. And this, you know, it shapes up in terms of large-scale dispossession, land grabbing, unchecked privatization, even of communal land. Last point, and I'll not really speak a lot on that because maybe we'll touch upon it later. Land administration. You know, land administration is basically what makes what protects land tenure security in housing, land, and property rights. And in the region, land administration is not well functioning, with some obviously exceptions, and some countries, really many countries actually really identifying this as a gap and making efforts to catch up and to modernize and improve the land administration. But still, we see very much, you know, paper-based, outdated, dysfunctional, and at the end, systems that do not serve all, but tend to serve only the wealthier, the more educated, the urban elite. So these, I would say, in a nutshell, are the 4 key elements that come to my mind when I look at housing, land, and property rights in the region.
Thanks, Umberta. Joseph, can I turn to you? How would you respond to that? Anything you'd build on, double down on, challenge? Please.
Yes. Well, thanks very much for the question. I think it's really appropriate to have a regional lens on this problem. It's certainly not unique to the Middle East and North Africa, but we have lots of lessons and lots of similarities across borders in this region. I think, first of all, as a matter of framing, we should understand that housing, land, and property are not all property, that land and housing also have a social function and other even ecological and physiological functions, at least in the case of land. So dealing with property, we're talking about owning things usually, but housing and land are not necessarily private property ownership, but they have this social function that I think is really important to keep in mind. Second, when we talk about forced evictions, forced eviction is classified in international law as a gross violation of human rights, affirmed by the Commission on the Human Rights Commission twice. And in that light, those who are subject to gross violations are also entitled to reparations. Reparation is a framework. The reparation framework was established by the General Assembly by a resolution in 2006. And we use this as a framework also for the restitution of housing, land, and property. That is, the first element of reparation is restitution, including return, resettlement if necessary, rehabilitation, compensation for those values that cannot be restored, but it's very different and much broader than only compensation. It also includes guarantees of non-repetition. We have a problem with repeated displacement also in the region, multiple displacement, and then also the satisfaction of victims that justice has been done. So when we're looking at housing, land, and property, the ultimate objective is justice. As a regional situation, we don't often have a diagnosis of what is happening in the region. And given the propensity for forced displacement, forced evictions, especially in the context of violence, conflict, occupation, and war, we've taken on this issue as a matter of research, first of all, to diagnose what is the problem. And if we look around the region, we had found already in 2018 and presented this in the first Arab Land Conference, that the numbers of persons in the region, Middle East, North Africa, that are entitled to reparation for their loss of housing and land as a result of conflict, occupation, and war, amount to at least 33 million people. Now, that's the population of a medium-sized country. These people are not those who have been the recipients of reparation or restitution. We've had some good practices in the region. For example, in the displacements during the 1967 war, Egypt was quite successful in restoring people's housing and resettling them. But we have some other really bad examples. Of course, there's the central injustice in our region, which is the colonization of Palestine. Those 7 million people who are refugees have not enjoyed restitution or wider reparation. We have, for example, those who were displaced in the Algerian Civil War, who were written off by the government in 2007 as being no longer an issue. They could count as possibly 1 million people who have been displaced and have had no reparation for that gross violation. Western Sahara, which is occupied and has produced lots of displacement and 175,000 at least refugees. All these together, not taking into consideration the most recent events in Libya, for example, we can still consider that number to be relevant. At least 33 million people who are entitled to reparation for their loss of housing, land, and property. And this really calls for a regional approach. So I think that is a theme that we're dealing with here, not as a case-to-case basis only, or not even identifying who are the perpetrators, but with a focus on the victims. This is the dimension that we face in housing, land, and property in the region.
Thanks, Joseph. Both Joseph and Umbretta. So you've provided an extremely important kind of oversight into the region and the kind of snippets of vulnerability and the issues at hand. Sarah, before I turn to you, I'd like to just to now circle back to Umbretta and Joseph in the same order. So you've spoken to us about these issues, the challenges. Could you each speak to how your agencies are respectively addressing this? So perhaps, so Umbretta, first to you, with your work with the Global Landfill Network, GLTN, if you can speak to us, as what approach do you take? How are you addressing these issues that you just highlighted? Could you speak to that?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Obviously, as we noticed from the introduction, the problem is quite large, and the challenges are in terms of housing and housing, land, and property rights are multiple. So definitely UN Habitat, and the Global Landfill Network take this up from the partnership approach. So basically establishing international and national platform to join effort with governments, with local government, with international partners, national professional of the land sector that are of different types, also civil society, to try to find solutions, and not only to try to find solutions, but to adapt global good practices to the region and the tools and approaches that have worked and were tested elsewhere, and adapt them and contextualize them to the Arab region. So in this effort, for example, the Arab Land Initiative was established in 2016, and I'm very happy that many of the 50 partners that are actively working with us in this initiative are in this room, in this event, including represented here by Joseph. So the focus is to how can we, as international actors, empower and strengthen the efforts of national and local actors to address these challenges with capacity, knowledge development, fostering collaboration, and etc. So the Arab Land Conference that Joseph mentioned, we had 2 sessions, was one of them. We have, for example, a research innovation fund where we try to have young professionals documenting some of these aspects and some of the solutions that were applied successfully in the region, establishing of twinning arrangements. For example, we facilitated one between the land administration department of the government of Jordan and Palestine that have a lot of similar issues, to come together and see how Jordan advanced better, for example, than Palestine on solving some of the issues, and for them to learn from each other. One that I am very I have high hopes for is we know that a lot of work is being done by university and training institutions in the region. Definitely, we mapped what is taught in the universities with regard to land-related aspects, and we identified the gaps. And now we're working with existing programs and to complement what is already taught, for example, in urban planning, to complement and broaden a little bit these teachings with, for example, dealing with the large ways of displacement that, dealing with displacement, housing, land, property rights, and violation in conflict is not traditionally part of the curricula taught to students, so that we can really, have in the coming years hundreds of students that actually are geared and able to take up these topics and make them work in their countries. And definitely, of course, as UN Habitat, I mean, we are active in 15 countries with 15 country offices. So we do a lot of work really on recordation of land tenure security, housing reconstruction, informal settlement upgrading, and land administration work. So I would leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Umberto. And Joseph, yeah, similar question to yourself. Habitat International Coalitions. Where is the laser focus? Where is your organization's energy focused on all of these myriad of issues? Where are you focusing in on right now? What's the priorities?
Well, I would say two priorities. One is as an organization that is dedicated to supporting civil society in upholding and developing the habitat agenda since 1976, we're really concerned that civil society have an effective role at the policy level, not just providing charity or humanitarian assistance, but actually looking at solutions and having a role in that. Actually, that's necessary for a policy to be legitimate in the eyes of wider civil society. So that's one of our objectives. The other is really to focus on the detail, particularly the documentation of losses, costs, and damages. Now, this could be from forced eviction, could be from dispossession, destruction, demolition, or even violations or impacts that arise from privatization. And we've been maintaining since 2006 a violation database, but that hasn't really been enough to come to solutions and to apply the reparations framework on behalf of victims. So we've embarked on a violation impact assessment tool and applied it to many different cases, including slum removals in India, women's denial of inheritance, even post-conflict or post-election conflict and displacement in Kenya, and upscaled that to look at land restitution in the context of Yemen, from the previous government's violations, but also during the current war, that would contribute to transitional justice one good day in the future. We're also now focused on loss and damage that could arise from climate change, and this is something that not only in our region but globally is an issue. And we can talk about that in greater detail. We've had some mentions already of loss and damage. Thank you. But we're also concerned that the loss and damage discussion that has taken place in COP27 and the ambiguous but nonetheless hopeful resolution to establish a fund, that these discussions are still state to state issues and not really concerned with the detail, the community level loss, costs, and damages, and the need actually to have the human center in the loss, costs, and damage restitution, whether it's from climate change or from other causes. So these are really the two things. It's the role of civil society, but also the importance of community generated data to have specificity and accuracy in the values at stake when land, housing, and property are lost, no matter what the cause.
Thanks, Joseph. And thank you for the opening with regards to climate change. I'd really welcome the opportunity to dig into this a little later in our session, but just to hold that thought. Sarah, can I turn to you now? We know, as you may be aware, NRC have a strong presence across the region, and the Information, Counselling and Legal Assistance Program, ICLA, it is also present, or it has programs or operations in many countries across the region, very much at a household or a case level. And therefore having to, I imagine, adapt what you do based on the context at a very localized level, at a household level. And so can you speak to perhaps just broadly the approach of ICLA? What is it that you really get to? And then how does this manifest at a case level, at a family level, at a household level? And I know you have some examples from Lebanon and Egypt, and Lebanon and Syria, if you could speak to that.
Thank you, James, and thank you everybody for attending this forum. Yeah, as you mentioned, NRC and specifically ICLA has been working in the country, in the region for many years with a focus on HLP. ICLA is implementing, as you mentioned, at household level, as well as adapting to the context in each country. So in Lebanon, or generally, ICLA provides information to refugees or the targeted populations on HLP and help refugees to understand their shelter situation, including rights and obligations of tenants and landlords, aiming to equip them to respect their obligations and claim their rights, which will increase their security of tenure. We also facilitate lease agreements and apply collaborative dispute resolution techniques in order to reduce disputes related to HLP rights, conduct due diligence for shelter beneficiaries, and provide the trainings for local authorities and key stakeholders, in addition to advocacy efforts related to HLP. At the regional level, as you mentioned, we're responding to the Syrian crisis, and we try to adapt and implement a cross-border intervention. So under GIZ funding, we're implementing currently a project on HLP in Syria, in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. So conducting the relevant researches, legal researches on HLP in Syria, where we are providing information on various HLP Syria topics and extensive trainings to NRC staff to provide further clarification on types of cases that can be identified. We're providing also one-on-one counseling sessions of HLP and civil documentation, printing out leaflets and distributing it to refugees, organize power of attorney to follow up the procedures in Syria, mainly through family members of the refugees, addressing different challenges faced, such as in Lebanon, the communication outage and power outage, increase in communication fees. So we try to reach out to beneficiaries through different methods, for example, using WhatsApp to communicate with them and help them communicate with their family members. We also have a gender lens throughout the research on refugee women and property back in Syria. Also, we organized or established a regional network of lawyers that provide guidance notes, and we have a common scenario matrix established with UNHCR, as well as we established an internal help desk to discuss the different cases identified in the region. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Samar, could we turn to you now? So we heard from Sarah, which we touched on a little bit of the context in Lebanon. I'd like to drill down on that a little bit more. So Samar, knowing if you could speak to the housing, land and property rights state of play in Lebanon, and can you speak to, or can you share with us what are the drivers, what are those driving forces that are heightening vulnerability for families in quite a currently acute and also protracted governance and economic crisis? So could you speak to some of those drivers? And as part of that, please do also share, with your work, what are you doing? What is Habitat doing in Lebanon to address that, to affect change? Thanks, Samar.
Good morning, James, and good morning, everyone. Please let me know if you will
put your microphone a little bit closer. It's just a bit hard to hear.
hear me now.
A little bit better.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Good. Go for it.
Is it clear?
Colleagues in the room, is it clear? If you could speak up a little bit more, that'd be great.
Okay, so I will try. Yeah.
That's good, Samar. We can hear you well.
So maybe now it's better.
I actually think it was better before. So I think it was better just before.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I will start by providing a general overview within our Lebanese context in terms of how housing was oriented and the external and internal influences and the regulatory framework related to housing, specifically tenancy. To understand our local context and the current situation, we need to look back into history throughout years where, due to external conflicts and wars, flux and waves of migrants from different nationalities arrived in Lebanon, whether the Armenians, the Palestinians, and others, and also recently the Syrians. In addition to internal migration occurring due to several wars, such as Israeli wars or the Civil War, and rural to urban migration seeking better livelihoods, and also not to forget migrant workers. Those naturally sought housing opportunities in the cities, along with employment opportunities, or at the fringes of the cities and the biggest cities in the country, including Beirut and other main cities, as these areas attracted people seeking affordable housing and places to work. With the absence of or limited intervention from the state, the lack of housing policies, with the need to secure housing and access to housing, all of this resulted in informal settlement, as the suburbs, as the southern parts of Beirut or the eastern part of Beirut, and those are considered densely populated areas and considered affordable to a certain level. In addition to Palestinian camps and many other areas within or close to major cities. Another aspect is the regulatory framework and the impact of regulations and policies related to housing after the Civil War in supporting the market led to housing sector being under the effect of the market, and land was treated as an asset and housing was not prioritized as a right. This didn't respond to people's need and resulted in informal rent and inadequacy of tenure arrangement. And this provided the only way to access housing for a large portion of the urban community, with arrangement outside public institutions. Accordingly, housing in different areas lost the public nature. Also, the complexity of the regulatory framework in Lebanon related to tenancy, and with a number of rent law applied, whether the old rent law before the 1992, the new rent law of 2014, and the amendment of 2017, also the law enacted after the blast. All of these created complexities, and people lacked awareness on their rights and responsibilities. A small portion of the community had protection of right to housing, but those were temporary due to exceptional circumstances or popular pressure and demands, without guarantee for their right to housing in general. After the blast, a level of tensions also occurred between landlords and tenants regarding who is responsible to conduct repairs and who's eligible to get compensations paid. We had a number of reconstruction phases in the country, in the history of our country. As we face overlapping crises at a time, the current severe economic crisis and the devaluation of the Lebanese pound are also creating additional burden on lower income families and vulnerable groups to secure housing. Some families paid up to 90% of their income to cover housing, and they dropped some of their basic needs, including electricity. All these conditions created a burden over vulnerable and low-income groups and causes increasing threats of evictions. As for the second part of your question, James, concerning habitat intervention and contribution to HLP, we had the chance to contribute through the shelter sector, through raising awareness, and through the implementation of both our programs, the shelter and urban recovery. I will start rapidly through the HLP TTC, which was created in response to the Beirut blast, to be able to tackle issues related to HLPs, and it was formed within the Beirut Blast Protection and Shelter Sector working groups. Habitat was represented within the TTC and contributed to the development of a guidance note in the context of the BPE, with the main objective to guide shelter actors in providing support to mainstream HLP rights in shorter and longer term, and to contribute to a comprehensive Build Back Better approach covering right to adequate housing, from physical shelter restoration to securing tenure rights. This guidance note included several parts, including main definition related to HLPs, including also major HLPs issue in the context of the BPE, as the missing HLP documents, the lack of information and awareness, the threat of evictions faced by people, and some of owners refusing to rehabilitate their damaged properties. And another list, for the sake of time, I will skip to the other part of this guidance note, which included some legal framework in relation to BPE, and also the laws enacted in response to this blast, also the HLP due diligence in order to mainstream HLP rights and shelter response, and the referral pathways considered through provision of counseling and legal assistance. And also it linked with other sectors as cash for rent assistance and minor repairs and rehabilitation. An additional TTC was also created to develop a guidance note on HLP at the national level in October 2021. In addition, a major issue regarding HLP is the lack of awareness of people, including both landlords and tenants, especially vulnerable groups, of their rights and responsibilities. For this purpose, we at Habitat worked on an IEC material which was shared and endorsed by the HLP TTC. This material included key HLP issues, key definitions, and a section on the Lebanese law related to tenure, and information on legal evictions and the conditions of these legal evictions and compensations related. And the most important section within this HLP document within this IEC material was the rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords, because obviously people didn't have a clear idea about their basic rights and responsibilities, whether tenants or landlords. Concerning tenants, for example, the validity of verbal agreement as per the Lebanese laws, and the currency of payment, also as per the Lebanese law on money and credit, and the right to live in adequate safe places linked to an infrastructure and electricity and water. We have cases in Lebanon where people literally live in a garage or a parking space with no openings to this space. Also, the right to be protected from unilateral changes in the contract from the landlord side, whether in terms of rent or duration of the contract, and also concerning eviction occurring. In addition, within our programs, whether the shelter or the urban project we implemented in partnership with CRS, we had to support and to ensure the do no harm to beneficiaries. That's why we had the 3 PA agreements, the 3 parties agreement, including the landlord, tenants, and the local implementing partner, our local implementing partner. And these 3 PA includes a number of clauses, and its main objective is to inform landlords on the rehabilitation works occurring, including BOQs and the works to be conducted, and taking tenant to maintain the unit and improvement occurring at this unit, and to use the unit for the purpose agreed upon, for example, residential or else, with a main clause on rent freeze for a limited duration, and undertaking to not evicting the tenant for this period of time. A similar agreement is also considered within our urban recovery programs for building rehabilitations. Signing this 3 PA, whether in the shelter or the urban recovery, is a prerequisite prior to any repairs or rehabilitation works to be done. Thank you.
No, I can one, just commend you on the work that I know that you're doing at the country level, but I also just wanted to call out something that you mentioned earlier. There are instances of 90% of people's income, if I heard that right, is directed towards rental payments, and I think from numbers that I'm aware of, if anywhere above 30 to 40% of one's income is directed towards housing, whether that's a mortgage or rental, you're considered in housing stress or in financial stress. So just to call out that number at 90% is an acute crisis. So thank you for highlighting that, Samar. Colleagues, we have about 10 minutes. We have some more questions, the panelists, but I'd really just like to turn it to you and just have an opportunity if there are any questions or comments from the floor. So I'll pause for a few seconds, welcome any discussions. If not, we've got some more questions for our colleagues. I'll pause. Okay, no problems. Let's circle back now to day one, the opening plenary, where that focus, that discussion was on climate change in relation to COP27. But for this session, for this next question, which I'll just ask any of you to answer as you wish. So let's look ahead 10, 20, 30 years. We know, and Umberto, I think you referenced this already, 60,000 people already displaced by, or already affected by climate-induced displacement. So we know this will increase. We know this will result in further tension, further confusion, further strain on basic services, and heightened vulnerability for those that are already most at risk. So whether Joseph, Umberto, Sarah, Samar, can you speak to how your respective agencies, how are you preparing for this? how are you responding to it? And I'd really love your thoughts. Are we ready for this? Are states ready for this at a national or a local or a city level? Yeah, if you could speak to that, perhaps Joseph, to start with yourself.
There are a few things that we've already done in response to the Asian tsunami, for example, in assessing the resettlement and reconstruction that has taken place and how it has taken place and what are the consequences of that for communities, whether they're forced to resettle, and this has of course affected a lot of the coastal communities adversely. We've had the experience of NGOs parachuting in and spending a lot of money to rebuild housing. But again, like in the last panel, we discussed the absence, the exclusion of the people themselves in determining what is the quality, the cultural appropriateness, and even in some cases the climate appropriateness of the housing that's built. And then there's no accountability for these private actors. These are issues that we already know, and we will face them for sure in the future in trying to remedy the situation for people displaced from climate change. And as I mentioned before, the discussion so far is a lot of state-to-state discussion, where if there is what's being called compensation, it's not really compensation, it's something else, but if it were to be a transfer from the fund to governments, we know that a lot of governments have a business model that would favor big corporations and private sector actors, not so much the small and medium enterprises, but also leaving the public-private partnerships without the fourth P, which is the people. And those are things we're looking for and cautioning against that have to be written into these remedies that are, whether they're from climate change displacement or even from the reconstruction in Ukraine or in Syria. There are real human-centered issues that need to be in the methodology of all these remedies.
Thank you, Joseph. And just well noted about the people and the P4. If we forget that, it's a core ingredient now. Ombretta, would you anything you'd like to comment on what we're just talking about now?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as also we saw at COP, everybody, every organization, government is trying to rethink their approaches and strengthen their narrative to link a lot of what's been done and known already, to link it better to the climate change. And I think, we did different, at Habitat GLTN, we did different research, some global, some regional, on, how to bring together these aspects of land tenure rights and climate change and housing. I mean, just a few highlights are, first of all, that definitely these in the region, the climate change impact will really drive a lot of people to cities. Because of many factors that now I shouldn't go into so much, but droughts, salinization of agricultural land, etc., etc. So cities really need, and that's one of the messages we are conveying at Yanabi, that cities really need to be able to absorb large number of people coming in, not only for their own natural growth and sort of more typical or like whatever the trends that are already there in terms of rural to urban migration, but really a lot more of million people coming in and needing solution on the short term. So again, cities as buffers or safety nets for people displaced by climate. And then also the need, of course, of adapting the housing technique and the housing stock, you know, to be more capable to provide a safe shelter in the, you know, with the new heat wave, but also in a scenario where water will be extremely scarce. We know that the Arab region is the most water scarce region in the world. Actually, 76% of the freshwater reserves are already utilized versus 8% global. So housing needs to become much more water smart in the way water resources are used. And lastly, you know, again, you know, tenure security and protection of housing, land and property rights is also key to mitigate some of the impact of climate change, you know. And, you know, if we look at try to restore some of the land, you know, the Arab region also 70% of the land is considered degraded. So the region will need to move faster in terms of land restoration, reforestation, conservation of ecosystems, and basically nature-based solutions to agriculture. Housing, land and property rights, you know, to urban, peri-urban and rural area are key to enable all these mechanisms to function. So again, you know, the climate, the people, and the land comes together. Thanks.
Thanks, Umberto. So I'm conscious of time and I want to honor everyone's lunch. So can I allow me this? So for the four of yourselves, if there is, and I'd like to start with Sarah, Summer, Joseph, and Umberto, and if there is one message, one action, one call, one recommendation that you would like colleagues to leave this session with, what would that be? So perhaps one minute of a message or something that you'd like to highlight as part of this discussion. Could I start with you, Sarah?
Maybe to think of while understanding the housing, land and property issues and trying to make up solutions for these, to think about the individuals and the families that are in need and are displaced due to several reasons. But these people are in great need and they need us to respond to these needs in a humanitarian rights perspective. So this is something that we've been trying to look at and adapt and try to find different methods to understand these needs and the best ways to responding to these needs. Meanwhile, you can think of, or you can find out that sometimes what we think is better doesn't necessarily is the best for them individually. So this is something I'd like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Summer, can I turn to you? What's the one message, call out, recommendation you would like to share?
Yes, I just need to mention that we are facing a major. Can you hear me? James, can you hear me?
I can't hear you. Let's turn to Joseph, and then Summer will circle back.
I think from this panel and from this wonderful conference altogether, we see that alternatives to authoritarian approaches and geopolitical concerns, we really need to apply a human right to housing approach and put the human at the center of climate justice and also the end to conflict, occupation, and war. I think that's really the priority for us. It is for the region and it is for our future.
Thanks, Joseph. Well heard. Umberto?
Yes, I think for me it would be, I mean, to this audience and to our partners overall and countries that, land rights, land tenure security, and the way land and natural resources are managed do really matter, for housing, for climate, for peace, for social economic development, for the whole, all these interaction to work. And therefore, it's really important that they are better understood and there's more attention paid to them, at the different level. Sometimes, we suffer from people saying this is a technical, that is a technical aspect, it's too technical to be understood. But I think there is really need for all of us to make that leap and make sure all actors understand better these elements and incorporate them better in their respective work.
Thank you, Umberta. Sama, we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I just wanted to mention a major burden we are facing also, people are facing is the shortage in energy and negative impact over their health and well-being, and their need to switch to renewable energy. Also with the devaluation of the Lebanese pound and the orientation towards dollarization of rent, all of these are creating additional burdens, but we have opportunities. We have, of course, programs as Cash for Rent, raising awareness for people, but also we need to have a comprehensive housing policies to be able to support people, and also local authorities should have a major and essential role within their jurisdiction, and also serious steps and sustainable actions and strategies toward providing stocks of affordable housing and removing these stocks from the market dominance. We as Habitat will be working towards being part of this to be able to respond to people's need and to ensure preserving their dignity, their right to housing and to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sama. Well, colleagues, I'm going to wrap up and close us off and allow us all to eat. I know it was a long morning, but allow me 90 more seconds, and I wanted to call out two more things as we wrap up. One, we heard that in this region, so we have 60,000 people already displaced by climate-induced phenomena. We have 33 million people entitled to reparations, not accessed reparations, but entitled to reparations. And that speaks to a social justice and a human rights issue. And I heard that we heard this at the beginning of the session that, what's our ultimate objective? And the word justice was used. Justice, or the realization of rights and the rights of those that we aim to support and work with. So I just wanted to circle back and close on that. Colleagues, well, firstly, can we have a round of applause for our panelists, please? And for that, I wish you a good lunch, and thank you. We'll see you shortly. Marwa, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for the session. It was very informative.